Tonight's webinar is by FYI Doctors. FYI Doctors is the world's largest optometrist-controlled provider of ophthalmic products and services, a privately held, optometrist-owned and operated eye care company with over 500 optometrists, 250 locations, and 2,700 employees. The organization strives to deliver outstanding patient care. Headquartered in Calgary, Alberta, the company owns and operates a fully automated, free-form laboratory and distribution facility located in Delta, British Columbia. To learn more, visit fyidoctors.com. Our speaker tonight is Dr. Alan Ulsifer. Dr. Ulsifer is the chair and CEO of FYI Doctors. After graduating, he became one of the founders and the managing partner of Northern Vision Centre, which developed into one of Canada's largest independent optometric practices. Dr. Ulsifer has also been involved at the board level within the Alberta Optometric Association, Rotary, the Alberta Freestyle Ski Association, the Grand Prairie Chamber of Commerce, VSP Global, Gold Medal Plates, iWest Developments, 3 Squared Properties, and Optometry Giving Site. In 2008, Dr. Ulsifer led the formation of FYI Doctors, the largest merger in Canadian history by number of companies, and was also awarded the Ernst & Young Emerging Entrepreneur Award for Western Canada. In 2012, Dr. Ulsifer was the overall Canadian EY Entrepreneur of the Year. Dr. Ulsifer has spoken in Canada and the US on many subjects, including entrepreneurial growth and the future of eye care in North America. Dr. Ulsifer lives in Calgary, has been married for 36 years to Karen, and has 3 adult boys. Welcome, Dr. Ulsifer.
Thanks so much for the introduction. I didn't know we submitted the long biography, so apologies for the lengthy introduction. And I'm never very comfortable with introductions, but I do thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. Really thrilled to have the opportunity to share some information with you. The presentation is probably going to be different than what you expect. When I talk about consolidation behind the curtain, I will talk a little bit about some of the consolidators that are out there, what's happening in North America, but I'm going to provide some data and input on how other people have viewed and researched the Canadian market. So the plan is to go through some stats to talk about who the players in Canada and the United States are with respect to consolidation, to give you information as to why they love optometry. Consolidation is common now in healthcare in Canada. It was very common in the US, took a little longer to start in Canada, but we're seeing it in all areas: dentistry, orthodontics, physical therapy, optometry, and others. So why is it that optometry is now become such a target for consolidation? We're going to talk about the interests that independents have, or small, multi-location entities have. Is there still an interest in people joining a big group and so on? And I'll have some research to share with you there. I'm going to talk about communicated pros and cons. There's just a lot of information about the pros and cons of joining a group, not joining a group. And, I'm going to give some very honest input as to the realities of that. I'm going to talk about the math of consolidation and valuation. So how does the math work for the consolidator, and how does it work for the practice that decides, to join a consolidator? I'll also talk a bit about the COVID-19 or COVID-9 impact. It is changing things, and it's caused a temporary pause, but I'll get into more later on what that really means. I remember talking in Ontario many years ago at a conference, and talking about the interest private equity had in optometry at that point in time. And we thought that there would be more and more private equity entering the market. 2 years ago, about 15 were involved in eye care in North America, and now there are over 50 private equity firms involved in consolidating eye care. So it's really advanced dramatically, and I'll try to do my best to show you what that means. I also have somebody joining me, Dr. Mike Noggle. He's on the call as well, and I may ask him to weigh in and would just offer that he can weigh in and clarify some of the things I would talk about. Mike's an optometrist. Was an optometrist, still is an optometrist, but not practicing. He's full-time as a VP of optometric partnerships for FOI Doctors. And he does most of the work now, with respect to working with new practices, looking at joining our company. So with that, I will get rolling. So just a few things in the market. And when I talk about a lot of the things tonight, FOI Doctors has a minority partner now. Some of you may have seen the press release that we took on a minority partner, to help grow our business, as simply as that. They're a very, very large organization called L Catterton. They're a consumer brands organization, the biggest private consumer brand investor in the world. And they're partners with Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy. So when they look at, when we looked at finding a minority partner, we went through a process and invited, multiple organizations that we thought would be a fit for our values, would fit our organization, and would be a partner that could add value, to our organization. And to give you an idea, we had 17 companies bid on a minority position in our business, and a lot of them did market research prior to doing that. So the information I'm presenting to you is from McKinsey, and it's a study on the optometric market. They were hired by one of the companies, again, interested in us, to look at, hey, is FYI, a good opportunity? What's the market look like? What interest is there for optometrists to join that organization? And a bunch of this data, most of the data that I'm going to show you, is from that market research that was done. So again, when I show you these slides, try and think of it as in the context of McKinsey advising our future partner on what they thought about the vision care market in Canada, what they thought about FY, which I haven't included any of that information, but it'll give you an idea the extent of how deeply they go into analyzing this. And in Canada, we don't have great data naturally. So I really found all of this fascinating. Of course, I didn't get any of the data, till after our deal was done. So I'm able to share that with you now. So again, from their perspective, and again, this is pre-COVID, I will have some post-COVID McKinsey information as well near the end of the presentation that'll give you some insight as to what they're thinking is going to happen to the future market. So volume, again, pre-COVID, expected to grow around 3 or 4%. We've heard this before: aging population and increased incidence of health issues. They said price they expect to increase, around 1% annually. And so I'll get more into the breakdown of what's happened historically on price versus volume, but in their mind, there's going to be potentially a slight uptick in single vision as prices level off. Again, COVID could have a significant impact, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So in terms of the breakdown, and this is a different kind of breakdown than what I had seen before. So they've looked at the Canadian market in terms of, sales across vision care goods and services, and the mass merchants, around 4% of the Canadian market, department stores, 5%, ophthalmology, 5%, e-commerce, direct to consumer, around 5%, independent optometry, 45%. And you can see how that breaks down between goods and services. And then there's the corporate optometry, which excuse me, they've lumped multiple groups into that and, included FYI on that, although there's a conversation around whether FYI is corporate optometry or not, but I'll save that for another time. But that gives you a view of what's happening in the marketplace. So it's the first numbers I've seen where truly independent optometry was now a minority in the Canadian market. Again, growth expected to be around the 4%, hopefully from 2013 to 2017. The market grew at a 4%, annual rate. And so, they consider that actually pretty good. So we all remember the days of growing much more than that. But in the industry today, that's the overall growth of the market in the past 4 years. Another interesting breakdown showing that their belief is that, and their research shows that volume has grown more in eye care than actual price. So vision care services, have increased in volume. Excuse me, vision care goods have increased in volume, but pricing has stayed relatively flat over the last several years. So again, some further consideration of that later on. Again, they call specialty optometry all optometry. So, lumping corporate optometry and independent together. So basically optometry where there's eye care and, product under the same roof. So again, just gives you more of a breakdown. Again, their feeling is growth in e-commerce. It's not growing as much as what people might have thought. They do still see that as the biggest growing segment, and it's shown, that to be. But their estimates are that, by 2022, that it'll be 10.5 to 11% of the market. So, a good news for optometry in general. So there's going to be more stats later on. Those are just opening stats. I'm going to jump into the different consolidators, and some of this you may know, some of it you may not know. Ultimately, in the Canadian market, and it's very different to the US, which I'll talk about soon, there are two major consolidators, one being New Look and the other being FYI Doctors. Yes, there's other smaller entities that might be acquiring a couple practices here and there. There's a newer group called Vision Alliance Partnership, that's operated by the former CEO of one of the buying groups. But ultimately, the vast majority, 99 percentile of all deals are done either by New Look, which is also the owner of Vogue Optical in the Maritimes, Gresham Scaff in Quebec, and Iris, that we all know. New Look is a publicly traded company, so you can see the data on the Toronto Stock Exchange, financial information, those sorts of things. But publicly traded, you can buy shares, in that organization via the public markets. The other one is us, FY Doctors. Up until this year, it was 100% owned by optometrists, and now it's majority owned by optometrists. Part of our deal was to give some of the retired optometrists liquidity, and primarily to fund the business because we see great opportunity for growth, as all consolidators do. FY Doctors, the banners that we also have are Grimard in Quebec, Visique, which is our banner in Quebec as well, Optics International, and Factory Optical, which were recent transactions done. So that's the banners that FYI Doctors operates under. It's only been lately that we've done bigger, chains. Typically, all we've ever done is optometric practices. New Look, on the other hand, has mostly done bigger chain acquisitions. But what's happened lately is we've done still a lot of optometry deals, but done a few change, and now New Look's doing more optometry deals simply because there's not many chains left in the Canadian market. So those are the two players as far as ability to grow capital. Both companies have significant ability to continue to do deals with optometry practices. USA Consolidators, as mentioned, they're now over 50. Interestingly, we had an opportunity to look at one of them in the US. It started out as Clarkson's, and then it became Eye Care Partners. So the second biggest optometric consolidation in the US. The biggest one, my eye doctor. So again, know these folks pretty well. The United States being 10 times the size of Canada, there's a lot of deals to be done in the United States. And if you look at Vision Monday's top 50 biggest entities, you will see these two now where you wouldn't have seen them a few years ago, in that top and near the top. I'll give you some stats on that later. But again, these entities in the United States are all private equity. The vast majority are majority controlled by private equity. A lot of new ones, as I said, over 50 now, Spectrum, Acuity, Vision Innovation Partners. So there's just, there's just too many to list. And, in the United States, the top topic of conversation in optometry is consolidation. The one that's probably most interesting here is VSP Ventures. So we all know VSP, big insurance care plan, in the United States. You would have saw in my introduction, I was a board committee member, so got to know the organization fairly well. By the way, FY is not affiliated in any way with VSP at this point, other than being a Marchand customer. But VSP now is acquiring optometric practices through their ventures division. So something new that started last year. So they're now in the business of acquiring practices in the United States. So everybody's looking at it, and people are seeing opportunity. And as we go through the presentation, I'll give you more feedback as to why. To give you some idea of the money involved in consolidation, prior to COVID and even during COVID, there was record amounts of money awaiting investment. What we found is there was a time where businesses had to go big, private equity, and for investment. It's the other way around. They now find businesses that they want to invest in because they have more money to invest than opportunities. So there's a ton of money sitting on the sidelines and with a high interest in consolidation of all healthcare. I'm also chair of a board of an orthodontist consolidation, and a similar thing is happening in that industry as well. So I never would have thought orthodontists would do this, but it's happening. So to give you some ideas around the headlines, Goldman Sachs buys my doctors for $2.7 billion. That just happened just this year or last year. Partners Group buys US Eye Care Company in $2.2 billion deal. Again, just last year, and that's Eye Care Partners that I talked about earlier. Flush with cash, PE firms confront the new reality. PE private equity's record 1.5 trillion cash pile comes with a new set of challenges. I mentioned the challenges earlier, and the big challenge is there's not enough opportunities and too much capital to invest, and they're looking for high returns. That's what private equity does, and having cash on hand does not produce high returns for them. And then, of course, L Catterton with the minority investment in FY Doctors. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the math of consolidation. So I want to talk a bit about private equity versus venture capital. So I'm sure many of you have been approached, to invest in startup companies, know people that started an IT company, small business, and those are high-risk investments that are done through venture capital. So venture capital comes in early in a small business, takes the risk with them, puts an investment in, takes a lot of control and wants to have a lot of say, but they know that, hey, some are going to fail, but some of them are going to hit home runs. Private equity is completely different. Private equity looks at established businesses that are a going concern that they believe can grow, or they believe that they can run better. So there's two approaches in private equity investment. If they see an underperforming business, they come in and change out management and make the business more efficient, or they look at a business that's growing very well and doing well, and they lock in the existing management team and provide support for that business and capital for that business to grow much more rapidly and effectively. So big difference between private equity and venture capital. So it's private equity that has an interest in our space. Some of you will understand what EBITDA is, and you can tell consolidation is big in a healthcare profession when people actually know what it is. It's earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. So really, it's just a word that describes the cash flow of a business. The way businesses are valued, whether it's private, public, are based on multiples of that cash flow. So, optometrists in the United States, probably 80% of them know what EBITDA is. They know what their practice EBITDA is. And, they have an idea of what, value they might bring in, a consolidation kind of play. Why consolidation creates so much value is small companies are worth less than big companies. So if you take $1 of EBITDA or cash flow in a small company, it's worth X multiple. If that goes into that same EBITDA is rolled into a big company that's growing, that number, the multiple becomes much higher. So the math is simply people buying, consolidators buying companies at a lower multiple than what the value becomes in bringing it into the new company. So it's hugely a huge value creator. It's different in different industries. So if we look at oil and gas, the multiples are not very good in oil and gas. If you look in healthcare, the multiples are really high. So depending on the industry, there's a big difference in what that multiple of EBITDA and ultimate valuation of the company is. And what I would say is, eye care and optometry have produced amongst the biggest multiples from a valuation perspective of all the healthcare consolidations. So it's very, very desired. So getting more into why consolidators love optometry. Well, it's a big market. So this slide just is really them trying to figure out how big the market actually is in Canada. So they had, numbers ranging from 3.8 billion to 5.5 billion dollars, the overall size of the Canadian market, and kind of landed on Statistics Canada's figures of, they're pretty comfortable. It's at least 4.9 billion. And these are just different, entities that have estimated the size, of the market and where they get that valuation. So, I'll share some numbers with you a little bit later on, but it's a big market, even in a small country like Canada. To give you an idea of the extent to which they go through things, they do risk analysis. So again, this is still McKinsey as part of the engagement to see if FY is a good idea in Canada and if the optical market's any good. So they looked at what are the potential disruptors. So telemedicine, expansion of vision testing and prescribing privileges, e-commerce, adoption, expansion of selling privileges beyond eye care professionals, and then the emergence of vertically integrated, players like Warby Parker, Bonlook, and so on. So, what's really interesting is when they look at, is this a high risk, low risk, medium risk? The things that we get more worried about, they don't really see as being a big deal. They're more worried about Visibly and Inetra. And if some of you have done the Visibly, refraction, we had our whole advisory committee do it in management. You'd probably be less worried about it. From the technology we've seen in Inetra and the other devices, if they are successful, yes, it could have an impact. But what's interesting is they feel like expansion of selling privileges elsewhere, is, potentially a downside risk. So, and that would include, pharmacies, like Shoppers, doing eye care and eyeglasses. So just found it quite interesting. So we may look at things as a risk, but they, come at it from a slightly different angle. So, I can tell you that, they studied Warby Parker fairly significantly, and I think it's worth just having a discussion around Warby Parker. I was fascinated by this. It started on as an online platform that got all kinds of press, brilliant marketers, so on and so forth. Later on, they opened stores which basically were meant as service centers for their existing e-commerce clientele, but the reality is 90% of the revenue comes from their stores. Now, 330 million coming from those 60 stores is a pretty wild and crazy number. But the amount of cash going in, they're still trying to find a way to make the business profitable. So again, and you look at the size of Warby Parker for all the attention that's gotten, 330 million in revenue, take that, it's big in Canada, that's about 8 or 9%, or well, maybe 7.5 to 8 based on the numbers of the Canadian market. In the United States, it's 1 to 2%. So despite all the hype, their market share is incredibly low, and haven't penetrated as much as what people might think. So again, good news for optometry and an independent optometry. So they looked at, and I debated sharing this slide, but from their perspective, they looked at how many practices in Canada are beyond the 750,000 revenue threshold. Their thinking was, well, if it's not 750,000 in revenue, it's maybe not as desirable. I can tell you that I think both consolidators do deals smaller than that. But to give you an idea of how deep they went into understanding and assessing the Canadian market. So, again, they feel pretty good, as said earlier, about the growth in the market, increased incidence of disease and so on. They actually, I had an interview and they talked a lot about new opportunities like dry eye, myopia control. So things that you wouldn't have a clue that they would know about, they see those as opportunities for the profession. So still a very good outlook on the profession. So I found this interesting as well. So why do they love optometry? Well, screen time has almost doubled per capita since 2010. Talking about, again, myopia control, pediatric optometry. So this is, the extent to which, they've looked in, and they think these sorts of things could actually, increase growth in Canada by 8% on an annualized basis. So just, again, seeing some big opportunity for the profession. So this is their estimates of the number of independents in Canada, so 23 to 2550, and feeling like 1,650 of those, would have, or 1,400 of those would have revenue greater than $750,000. So a lot of big practices still in the Canadian market. Independents are doing well. And again, they've just broken down what their belief was to be in terms of the size of practices. Another reason they like optometry is they studied, what happened during the last recession, and talked to optometrists. They looked at New Look's results, and basically it felt like they treated optometry as recession resistance. Again, COVID will be ultimately a test of that, but they see the business as a recession resistant industry. And when it comes to consolidation, another word you hear all the time is synergy. How can they make the practices that come onto the business more efficient? So cost of goods, all those kinds of things create even more value than buying at a lower multiple and being more valuable as it's rolled in. Synergies are another huge opportunity. So every dollar that you save, adds overall EBITDA to the organization, and scale in, insurance, scale in supply chain, scale in telephone, all of that creates even more value for the consolidator. And, the shareholder in the business. So, if you're a shareholder in the organization to which you join, well, that's great. You're happy because you've got some equity in a business that's growing in value. So, you have the opportunity to have cash, to the extent that you want, and then equity, in a business that's growing. So, of course, when they looked at, FYI in the Canadian market, they wanted to know, is there an appetite for consolidation? Are optometrists actually even interested in joining with a consolidator? Because if they're not, it's growth that drives the share value and the value of the organization. If there's no growth, then there's not going to be a great uptick for them as for the business. So these guys want big returns, and growth is the key, the biggest key to that return. So they felt like a target that there's between 1,050 and 1,400 targets, practices that would be potentially interested or would be desirable for FYI, to approach. And again, you see they've broken it into the 750 threshold, so it gives you an idea. 70 to 75% of practices were willing or open to sell to what they call a corporate buyer, which would be a New Look or an FYI. Again, we're going to argue we're not corporate, but that's how they've done it here, and it's broken up. And there's much more detail on this, but I have to say that was a big surprise for me, that there was that willingness to. People would think about that to the extent that they are. And it talks about open to corporate, open to at least one type of buyer. And then you see the numbers go higher, where, I would only sell to another optometrist. Some would consider both. So it's, pretty shocking statistics, and I guess squashed any idea we had as to whether there's not enough people interested in this anymore, out there as independent optometrists. For the right price, the majority of owners are open to sell, especially recent graduates and those near retirement age. So interesting, recent graduates. So, but honestly, that hasn't been, that's been aligned with what we've seen. The average age in FYI matches the age of the Canadian population, and it's not the story always it is sometimes of someone just wanting to practice for a year or two and then be done. No, it's people that have a lot of years ahead and want help, support for the reason, whatever reason they've decided. They've decided that they want to be part of a group. So pretty significant numbers. And again, just more detail around age, just to give you that different perspective. So definitely the younger and the older have more of a desire, but it's still pretty significant amongst all age groups. And then again, willingness in the next 5 years. So maybe not today, but in the next 5 years, you can see the numbers again are fairly significant. So we've established that there's a lot of money, that consolidation is here to stay, that it's well funded, and that more and more private equity money is entering the space. So why would you think about it? What's the sales pitch that you're going to hear, would hear? And, I guess it really comes down to what problem is to be solved. So independent optometries, let's face it, it's tougher. This is a slide that I've used multiple times, used it at the beginning, talking to practices, but we've been living in a market where, especially in Ontario, when's the last time your fee went up? It's a commodity-driven market about discounts, pretty people wearing glasses, and, it's been tough. Wholesale costs for optometrists are much higher than their competitors. I can tell you this without question whatsoever. FYI pays far less for the same thing than you do. Marketing is getting more complex, digital marketing, search engine optimization, digital strategy, social online reputation management, just to name a few. So, as a bigger entity, you have better resources to be able to do that. So, again, you arguably by being in a big organization, you have a team backing you and doing that for you in an effective way. Increased cost for technology, yet fear to invest. So again, the more money we put in our practices doesn't mean that we're going to get it out. There's only so much that a buyer could afford to pay, and ultimately, maybe consolidation changes that, but that's been the thinking to date for a lot. Don't get me wrong, a lot do invest, but there's a lot that don't. We see it every day when we look at practices and the leg in a lot of them around investment. Management by hope and sometimes incorrect assumptions, and no exit strategy or equity value for years of hard work. Again, you build up this business over years, but that isn't going to necessarily create value for you in the end if you only have a buyer that can buy it for this much. So when we look at all of those things, they're all pretty compelling problems that, hey, if there was somebody along that could solve all those for you, that's a pretty compelling story. And if the price is right, pretty compelling if these problems can be solved. Now, not all consolidators solve those problems. Some of them don't solve any of them. And I'll talk a bit later about the questions to ask. But really what you want to know is if you're going to be in practice for a long time and you join a consolidation, what is my life going to be like afterwards? So it's great to have some money and do all that, but hey, if you plan to practice, what environment are you going to be in? Is your workload going to go up? Is it going to go down? What is actually done for you? What's the impact on the staff? So these are all really, really important questions and really important research to do for anybody looking at it, because not all deliver. And again, changes in the overall market. I mean, we've got to deal now with, online refraction, all the different things that might come at us. How are we going to deal with that? COVID, I mean, for crying out loud, who saw that coming? So again, why consider a sale? We don't like to use the word sale. We use merger. Most people, when they join FYI, take some equity. They don't have to, but they like the story and they want to see it grow. So we look at it as more as a merger. Now part of a team that supports you, and I think you'll hear kind of the same kind of conversation from all that do it. And as I said, it's important to ask the right questions. So pros, would be less management responsibility, make sure. Access to a team of professionals, whether it be finance, legal, marketing, IT, help desk, any of those sorts of things. Great market valuations. So the value of practices today through a consolidator is almost always more than what you can get from another optometrist. That's just the reality. Financial peace of mind, and part of a team. And for us, that's a critical thing. We consider, the organization a team, the practice as a team, the overall, the lab. So, are you or aren't you interested in being part of a team? And that's probably one of the biggest things people have talked about as part of, what it feels like, for us. Cons, loss of control. If you want to do everything exactly how you do it today, you're probably not going to like it all that much. There is stuff that is going to be done as a group. And the question really becomes, how is that decided? So if the organization says, we're going to go to standardized pricing, who's making that decision? Is it a decision made by peers? Optometrists that are saying, hey, that makes sense, or is it a decision made top down? So again, there are changes. How the decisions are made are critical to understand, but who's making them is critically important. Bottom line, there's a lot of advantages in doing certain things the same way across an organization, and if you're not leveraging the value, you're not likely going to make life easier for the practice, you're going to make it harder. Obviously, compensation, what does that look like? You need to understand that completely. And, most will give you a really good understanding of that, as part of the process. And again, after transaction experience is a risk, talk to others that have been in any group that you're looking at. Talk about, to the ones that have recently joined, what's it like? What are they good at? What are they bad at? And guess what? Nobody's going to be good at everything. People are generally very honest about that. So again, depending on how long you want to practice, that's a pretty, significant thing to consider. And again, just because it's said, do the testing yourself and confirm. So trust but verify. So how is a practice valued? So I think all of us have heard webinars where, there's traditionally been three different ways of approaching the price of a practice. One being net income plus assets. So you do a fair market value assessment of the assets. Not as common, because it's very difficult to get a fair market value assessment. The equipment suppliers will do it, but it's interesting the inconsistency in those valuations sometimes. Percentage of gross revenue. So, you kind of start at 50 and go up or down depending on what the performance of the practice has been. Gross revenue, can be a tough way to assess the value of a practice, especially if it's a high rent or a low rent, that being the biggest variation and secondly, income. So it just depends. What's most common or has been most common is the affordability amortization approach, where basically a new associate, if they're buying into a practice, they need a certain amount of pay to pay the bills. And now as an owner of the practice, they make more money. So it's a difference between what their income as an associate would be, what the delta is as a partner, and on a reversed amortization basis, what could they afford in monthly payments over a 5 to 7 year period. Again, earlier, consolidator metrics, it's more EBITDA. Some will do adjustments. So it's a multiple of EBITDA, but we would adjust up or down. based on age of the equipment, inventory, things like that. So idea being a brand new practice that's invested a bunch of money should get rewarded, and a practice that hasn't spent any money where the consolidator now has to put a fortune in, that you can't quite value them the same way. So, but all consolidators will use a multiple of EBITDA. Some will give an adjustment based on leaseholds and equipment. So things to ask that are critically important is, am I going to be locked in to a contract? So do I have to work for 5 years? Do I control my hours? Am I an independent contractor? Vacation flexibility, scheduling realities, reporting. How much information do you have to give? Is that mostly automated? Practice management system, all of that. So you want to ask how much extra work or how much less work is it going to mean for you in the business. And so again, ask people that are there. Don't make assumptions, trust, but verify is the way to go. So impact of COVID-19. Boy, oh boy, I don't need to speak any more to this. You're all living it. But it's referred to, I took the Institute of Corporate Directors course, a 12-day course, and I just finished it in January. And they talked about business strategy and, things you have to do as a board member, but they talk about the black swan. It's that event that, happens once in a lifetime, maybe, that changes everything. There's no way to defend against it. It's unpredictable. It's devastating to business. And it's really how do you manage through it and keep the business able to survive. So I didn't realize that, 2 months later, that we would be facing a black swan. So, what's the future? Predicting the future is easy. It's hard to figure out what's going on now. That's hard. I believe that. So what is going on right now? So again, this is from our partner through McKinsey. This is basically end of April, what people were feeling. 13% felt the worst was behind us. 55% were in middle, and 32% thought it was worse. The worst was yet to come. What it said is, guess what? More people are concerned about the economy than about the actual infection. So, you see people wear masks, but you look, at the time frame to the end of April, that was the biggest fear. And there's some new models that predict that that's still the biggest fear. Kind of went through, again, how do you win the consumer in this environment? And the next phase, the consumer experience will change. So it was panic and toilet paper buying at the beginning, waiting and worrying. And now, we're getting to the uncertain and uneven recovery. So what do they think? Social media conversations around distance and sanitization. So by the way, they felt the feeling of safety was huge in decision-making for consumers as to where they're going to spend their money. So it was a mix of safety and the value they see in the service. So again, what does the world look like? We have the new thing in Canada where people don't kind of like the CEWS program and like getting paid 75% for being at home. So I don't know about your businesses, but some people aren't excited to come back. They actually like the furlough, experience. Again, people with the new technology, who's tried it, and they've analyzed the numbers of who've tried a multitude of different things. The ones that have tried it, who's going to stick with it. So they did surveys of, shopping online, non-groceries. So how many did it before? How many people tried it out new? Domestic travel, all those kinds of things they've rated or they've tried new. But what they've said loud and clear is consumers haven't been very good at predicting their own future in the past. So what consumers think they're going to do right now isn't necessarily what they're going to do. And as you can see, just mindful of time, just the different things, people are doing for the, for people who felt their life was completely disrupted because of COVID versus everyone else, who's tried new things and what's percentage. So the ones that really felt impacted negatively tended to try new things more than the general population. But you can see that, people are trying a lot of new things. And again, trade-offs around perceived safety relative to the value they could get from the experience. And ultimately, the end, and this is the summary of a 4.5 hours of presentation, is they're skeptical of the new normal. They believe, for the most part, that people will go back to their normal habits. But there are marginal changes that will matter. And, we need to start thinking about how to prepare for that. How does it impact consolidation? So current approaches, some are taking a temporary pens down approach. So most consolidators, if not all, have delayed doing deals. They've pushed them back, delayed them, and are not seeking new deals at the moment. Most, not all. Most are considering lower valuations in the future. They think people, will, practices could be less valuable because they don't know how they're going to come back. And most are adding an earnout. So instead of all the cash up front, you get most of it with the balance of it coming, after you've got back to your historic revenues, and that might be a year later, it might be 2 years later. But most see this as driving a big increase in buying opportunities. And what I would say is that seems to be true. Certainly the orthodontic group is getting more and more calls. We're getting more and more calls. And what's loud and clear is the money is still on the sidelines, and consolidation is here to stay. So I'll give some closing advice as I see I'm getting to the end of my time, and do want to have some time for questions. So don't make assumptions. So don't assume that what you're hearing is true, and don't assume that what you think is true. That's negative. Ask the questions. Trust but verify. Think hard about the post-transaction experience. Talk to people who've been through it, and again, ask questions, a lot of questions. So with that, I'd invite Mike Noggle to add anything, or if not, we just open the floor to questions.
Yeah, no, I think we'll probably see most of it through the questions now.
Okay.
So I'll now share the questions you have submitted. The first question, where do you get your data from?
So this was through a McKinsey study that was done on the Canadian market by the actual minority investor that we made with. So they paid for the study in Canada as part of their due diligence on our deal with them.
Good, thank you. And we have another question. How does it work with FYI and El Catterton? Why did you partner with them?
We partnered with them because we've grown the business over the years using a line of credit in the bank and on cash flow. We loved not having a partner because we built the business how we wanted. We spent a lot of money on equipment. We spent a lot of money on things that weren't necessarily geared towards return on investment. We felt we were at a point in time where the opportunity to grow was big. We'd established our culture, our way of doing things, and the reality is there's lots of money out there, and we could only go at a certain pace of growth under the current capital structure. So Canadian banks are limited in what they could lend. We had doctors who had retired, and we wanted, part of our program is we want everyone to always have liquidity, and that's critical in our organization. So it was a solution for doctors. It was a solution for our ability to grow fast. It was a solution for ability to invest more in the business. And they got how important optometry was. And, they also own Dental Corp in Canada. They are a control investor of Dental Corp, a minority in FYI Doctors. So we felt it was a good fit and they could help us go faster. And the resources behind them are massive in terms of retail merchandising, through their partnership with Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy.
Yeah, Al, I would just add that, there's really a belief that in the industry that in the next 5 to 7 years or so, there's going to be a significant amount of change. And as to your point, is that we didn't feel that our speed of growth, although it was quite good for Canada, that it was going to be at the pace we wanted to be able to hold our own or even be at the majority spot for market share versus some of the major players that are going to be developing in those years. So I would concur with that. And also, of course, the minority idea is that a lot of players that come to the table, they want majority position. We were always adamant from the very beginning that we were wanting a minority partner only, and that did narrow down the options we had, even though there was still a fair amount left.
Sure, Mike. And the bottom line, I guess, is we always had to manage how many practices we brought on with our investment in IT, our investment in marketing, investment in our lab and manufacturing facility. We now have unlimited capital for doing deals and bringing in practices. So that's the single answer for why it made sense for us.
Great, thank you. The next question, if a private practitioner is looking to consolidation as an exit strategy, how soon should they start speaking to consolidation options?
It's flexible. I mean, if you talk to a consolidator and you decide it's not for you, that's fine. You don't get charged anything, obviously. Some people want to do it, exit right away. Some say, hey, I want to practice for 2 or 3 more years, but I want to make sure, I've got my practice sale, sorted out before I leave, and I want to make a little bit more money before I retire. So it's really, there's no magic answer. It really comes down to what the desires of the individual are. If they're just sick of managing as much and want to just check eyes, they might want to do it much sooner. So, it just really depends on the individual. There's no perfect time to do it.
I just like to expand on that too, Al. You said one of the biggest myths that is out there, and especially from our group perspective, is that it's for exit strategy only. And some people have said to me, I'm interested in your group for an exit strategy, but I'm not ready to retire yet. So one of the things that with at least again in our group I can speak to is that the majority of people coming into us, it's not about exit strategy. It's about the balance between life, keeping up with your clinical acumen through the years and keeping up with your business acumen and how competitive it is. So it really is what your goal is really going to dictate when you're going to be approaching. And for a lot of people, it's not just exit. It's about being part of that team, as Al spoke to earlier, and having support and resources behind you.
Good,
for sure.
thank you. We have one more question. What changes are predicted in 5 to 7 years that Mike is referring to?
Just more and more consolidation. There will be, and there will be less and less independent optometry, and that's the reality. We felt as an organization, because we're optometry controlled, that for us, it was always about controlling our own destiny, controlling, what Canadian eye care looked like. And, we felt we had to be big and continue to be, the consolidator of choice to be able to do that. So more consolidation is coming. We see that in the stats, we see it in the US, and generally that hasn't been a very good story for optometry. That's the cold-hearted truth of it all, is generally it's not been a good story for optometry. We look in the UK, we look in Australia, New Zealand, what's happening in the US. Doctors end up not having a good time in most consolidation plays. That's the reality, and that's what we wanted to protect against.
Thank
But
you.
it's happening. It's inevitable.
Okay,
And who knows what other changes? I mean, technology, telemedicine, like all of those things are potential changes. And all I know is that we've been better able to deal with things and be proactive, having the capital and resources that we've had by being a bigger organization.
Good. We have one more question. Rumor has online contact lens sales channels up 120% and OD channel down 80%. Do you think post-COVID this business is fundamentally changed? Do you feel it's worth the investment to chase? Practice e-commerce websites, question mark, and marketing, question mark.
Yeah, so contact lenses, I can tell you, even eyeglasses, so clearly had work in progress of 21,000 for eyeglasses. And if you know that number, it's an insane number. So I'm on a panel of a bunch of big businesses in the United States. And what happened during COVID is online went through the roof with contact lenses. And yes, optometric channels went down. ABB, which is a provider of, of contact lenses for 28,000 optometrists in the United States. At first, their numbers were okay, but then they dropped drastically. And contact lens distribution in Spanish quite different in the United States. What we saw after opening, and the numbers are just emerging, is e-commerce has dropped again quite a lot. So it was a during COVID big spike, but it's not dropped down to its previous levels. So we saw in our e-commerce channel, our contact lens orders went, through the roof compared to traditionally, and we found the same thing as well. Now that our practices are opening up, people are going back to normal distribution. But I do think we need to rethink how we distribute contact lenses, ship direct, all those kinds of things, e-commerce, subscription, I think is huge, a huge need for us to be competitive in contact lenses. Let's face it, if it's easier than coming to us, a lot of people will, keep the habit that they felt was easiest.
Good, thank you. So at this time, I'd like to thank Dr. Olsifer and Dr. Noggle for this insightful presentation, and FYI Doctors for partnering with OAO for tonight's webinar.